Hello and welcome to Clean Energy Dialogue. I'm Mark Dreyer in Beijing. Today we're talking about the challenges of creating sustainable eco-cities and how China plans to cope with the urban migration of 300 million people over the next 20 years. And the challenges are significant. Abandoned projects, poor management and lack of expertise, coupled with a growing middle class that can afford to waste energy for the first time, mean that the need for China to build more eco-cities is more pressing than ever. But if successful, China's urban landscape would be revamped by an improvement in high-density living conditions, and there would also be a much-needed reduction in energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. AECOM is one of the companies involved in planning China's urban future. The Fortune 500 company has set up a China Sustainability Center in Beijing and is involved with everything from building low-carbon development zones and conducting feasibility studies for electric vehicles to liaising between government authorities and private developers to tackle development and urban planning challenges. Our reporter Vivi Lin has been talking to one of the center's directors, Helena Fu.
Helena, thank you for joining us. So AECOM has been working on China's sustainable eco-city development for years. What is the biggest challenge there?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is going from vision to reality. And for many of these projects, there's over 200 projects across China right now that call themselves eco-cities. The key elements of environmental, economic, and social sustainability are still on the drawing board. And I think one of the key barriers to that is the financing, because if the money isn't there, then the project will never take off.
So what are the major channels for financing right now?
Well, we've seen different models, but there's no one-size-fits-all solution. So we've seen the government taking the lead in providing much of the funding. We've seen the government cooperating with the private sector, and we've also seen the private sector taking the lead. But I think in any of these circumstances, there needs to be a very strong governance structure in place so that the roles and responsibilities of each of these entities is clear. That's because eco-cities in themselves are huge endeavors, and no one entity can take it on themselves.
And I have to mention this, for example, like local governments, and they're laden with quite a lot of debt, local government debt. And what kind of benefits would they get to build eco-cities like this?
I think one of the challenges that local governments face is, on the one hand, they have their directives coming from Beijing. Beijing says, we're going to become a sustainable, harmonious society. On the other hand, they have their own pressing challenges. I mean, the problems that come with urbanization, the very quick urbanization. So that includes congested traffic, really poor air quality. So I think cities and local governments are looking for solutions that work at the local level. Where the funding is going to come from is going to be the big question, how the economics are going to work. Because the way that eco-cities have been built up until now, or have been designed up until now, is under the premise that once we finish it, people will just move in naturally. But actually, you need to have the economic base for that to happen. You need to have jobs and you need to have businesses that will attract residents to the eco-cities. I think that's going to be one of the major challenges coming up.
And we know that you are advising for the eco-city development in Tianjin. So how is it going so far?
We're currently helping Tianjin Eco-City get to where they want to be, and we're helping them develop policies and strategies to help them reach their goals. These goals include things like getting up to 20% of their energy from renewable sources like solar and geothermal, and also having all of the green buildings on their site. Also having 90% of their transportation come from green transport, which is non-motorized transport or public transportation. That way, when people move into the first phase of the eco-city in the next 3 to 4 years, there are going to be policies and strategies in place to help them achieve sustainable lifestyles. But I think in the end, when it comes to eco-cities, the success or the failure of them are not going to be about the beautiful plans or achieving really ambitious energy goals, but in the quality of life of the people who live in these cities. That's going to be the watermark.
So how do the city planners and also the advisors like you ensure or prevent those cities becoming like an empty city?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is the economic base needs to be there. And part of that is measurement. Measurement is the key. If you can't measure your social, your environmental, and your economic impacts, then you can't manage them. And AECOM's developed a model that does just that. We've been working on applying this model to different design and planning processes throughout China and in Asia.
We mentioned that China's fast-growing urbanization, and it seems that the concept of building a mega city is gaining more ground than building an eco city. Sure. So is it feasible, is it possible to build up a mega and also eco-friendly cities?
China's rapid urbanization is really an unprecedented opportunity to design and build cities that forgo locking in high environmental and social costs. In fact, in developing countries like China, when people move from the farm to their city, the energy consumption actually doubles or triples. That's why it's important to find an eco-city model that works and is scalable. Right now, eco-cities are still in very much the pilot phase, and I think if we find an eco-city model that works, then we'll be able to scale it to the megacity level.
So have we seen any successful model, a pilot model in China so far?
I think the next 5 years are going to be very critical for this eco-city model. We're going to start seeing people move into the first phases of these eco-cities in China and around the world, and we're going to be able to see how people react to living in very heavily planned environments. We're going to see whether or not they're actually carrying out on the operational side the sustainable goals that were on the drawing board in the beginning.
And also geographically, which part of China do you expect we will see more eco-friendly cities?
I think it will really depend on the local government and the vision that local governments have for their particular localities. I can't say that a particular area in China will find an eco-city model that works for them first. I think it really comes down to the champions within the leadership of the local governments. When it comes to eco-cities, a lot of the eco-cities that have been designed so far have been on greenfield, or they've been completely starting from scratch. And I think the challenge for eco-cities will be to be able to replicate a model that was done in an area that was built from scratch and apply it to an existing city like Shanghai or to a Beijing. So I think there's opportunities in both places, both in retrofitting as well as in developing completely new cities.
So what is the outlook of eco-friendly cities development and planning in China in the next 5 years?
Well, I think in an even longer frame, with basically around 300 million people, the entire population of the United States moving to China's cities in the next 20 years, we've got to get it right. And I think that part of getting it right is getting the economics right. Part of getting it right is making sure that there's policies in place to make it work when people actually move in. Within the next 5 years, I think that's going to be the proving ground. We're going to see the first phase of people moving in. We're going to see what the first results are when people move into these buildings, start turning on their stoves, start turning on the air conditioning. We're going to see, whether or not those energy goals, whether or not those transport goals are going to come to reality. And we're going to have to adjust. We're going to have to be flexible based on how people are using them to develop new policies and ways of managing eco-cities, because they're sort of like an organism in and of themselves.
So how about the existing cities like Beijing and Shanghai? How to make them more eco-friendly? And is it too late?
Sure. Well, we're actually partnering with Beijing right now to help them think about how they can become a world-class city. And part of becoming a world-class city means becoming a city where people want to live, where the quality of life is good, where the air quality is good, where the transportation is not so congested. I think definitely megacities can become quote unquote more environmentally friendly, more sustainable. And I think it can do it by policies, and I think it can do it by actually building and making sure that their future building is in line with what they want it to be. Policies, they can work on building retrofitting to make sure that their buildings are working efficiently. They can work on zoning to make sure that their urban core is more dense so people can easily get from point A to point B without having to travel throughout the entire city. They can work on revitalizing their waterfronts. Most people don't know that Beijing has a wonderful waterfront, a lot of water in the city. But in fact, many of the highways and many of the big roads are right next to the water, so people can't actually get to the water to enjoy them. Because I think it's not about eco-cities, it's about the quality of life of the people who live in the cities. So yes, environmentally friendly, economically sustainable, and socially sustainable are all very important. But in the end, it's really with the aim of improving quality of life.
And you have been working with different developers, property developers, including the biggest one in China, Vancouver. And so how willingly do them want to get involved in those eco-friendly city building?
Right. Well, we like to partner with leading private and property developers to help them achieve their sustainability goals. And I think many of the leading developers are really willing to take a leadership stance in the industry and try to prove that they have what it takes, that they would like to actually build out and be a part of building China's sustainable future.
But would it cost them more to build up a more eco-friendly building?
I think it takes an integrated approach, and integrated approaches don't necessarily need to cost more. In fact, one of the models that we've been developing when applied to buildings can show that sometimes certain measures can be actually cost savings rather than cost outputs. It really is a matter of doing it more smartly from the beginning. So if you can design, for example, a building that takes advantage of solar radiation, if you design a building that kind of takes advantage of stormwater harvesting, then it doesn't have to be more expensive. It's just smarter. It works with nature rather than against it. I think one of the challenges in a very engineer-oriented and very scientific-oriented society, it can be challenging because people want to, for example, use hard infrastructure methods to deal with things that could be done in a more aesthetically pleasing and effective way. For example, in Beijing, one of the challenges really, when it rains, it really rains. I think everyone's seen it, and it really floods. And so, how do you deal with that? And one way is you can build lots of pipes and pipe that stormwater away as quickly as possible. But another way is that you can develop you can implement water-sensitive urban design techniques to actually use natural grass, bioswales to treat the water before moving it on down the drain.
That's all for now on Clean Energy Dialogue. I'm Mark Dreyer. Thanks for watching. See you next time.